How could you do that to me? How could you? I'll never forgive you, never. Whether we ever actually utter such words or just think them, whether we actively refuse to grant forgiveness or just make clear through our behavior that we continue to carry the wrongdoing and its harm in our hearts and souls, we seem to regard some deeds as so very hurtful, so beyond the bounds of decency as to be unforgivable. We carry them with us to our graves. What for you would constitute unforgivable words or actions? Set aside the easy answers and the obvious villains like Hitler or the latest offensive politician, and instead look through your life experiences with people you've known, people you've been close to, since those are the people most apt to wound us so deeply that we never forgive them, the people who have just the right ammunition and just the right access to our places of vulnerability to be able to harm us the most. Have you experienced words or actions that are seared forever into your soul and labeled unforgivable? Step back from them for just a moment and consider, what was it about them that pushed them beyond the usual boundaries of things we're able to set aside and made them permanent? Which is one quality that comes with judging something to be unforgivable, namely that it will never change and never disappear. As you look at the words, the behaviors that fall into your own personal hell of unforgiveness, can you focus in and clarify what makes up unforgivableness for you particularly? Is it the words themselves? Is it the behaviors themselves? Is it some unique combination of words and behaviors in the hands of specific people who have the power to cause you pain unlike any others? The theme for this month in worship is compassion, a quality all spiritual traditions encourage and teach, a quality that often shows up whenever thoughtful people are asked what they would most like to cultivate in themselves in order to be better persons. And forgiveness is a particular manifestation of compassion, maybe even requires compassion to get it underway in our hearts and spirits, as it alters the way we see one another and opens the door for us to make changes in relationships. And the most complicated and elusive change in a relationship is forgiveness. We hear we should do it. We try and force it. We suffer when others refuse to offer it to us. Relationships break and never heal when it cannot be summoned up. Forgiveness is also a helpful consideration for a congregation moving through a ministerial transition. You're in the midst of a reset of every aspect of this spiritual community as you prepare for your next chapter. And invariably, that reset will challenge you to find a way to forgive one another, to forgive boards and people in positions of leadership, to forgive ministers and staff members, to forgive people who left this congregation believing themselves to be beyond forgiveness, to forgive people who left this congregation believing the people here to be unforgivable. The stirrings of compassion point us towards forgiveness, but don't take us all the way there. And much of what we've learned about forgiveness not only does not help us summon it up, but actually prevents us from stepping more fully into it. But it is never, never too late to forgive and be forgiven. It is also not necessary for the other person to still be alive and present in order to have forgiveness happen. Some studies in spiritual teachings of forgiveness suggest that in order to forgive, we first need the experience of knowing ourselves to be forgiven. If you can accept another's forgiveness, then you should be able to offer forgiveness to others. Yet we often get caught when that shoe is on the other foot, finding the wrongs that have been done to us just sticking in our craw. Too painful, too egregious to swallow, since swallowing them seems to be what we have to do in order to forgive someone. But how can I ever forgive your betrayal, your lies? How can I ever trust you again? Why would I ever assume you would be there for me after the way you let me down? The old saying captures our usual forgiveness process in a nutshell. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. In other words, I have within me just one forgiveness chip to spend. Beyond that, I would be stupid to forgive anymore. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Perhaps the most famous words involving forgiveness ever uttered, the words are attributed to Jesus in the final hours of his life while he was experiencing extreme pain, abandoned by all his followers, attended only by a couple of friends and his mother. Unwilling to fight, he gives up any vestiges of anger or bitterness, absolving his enemies and supporters alike for having failed him in the end. Seldom do the stakes of forgiveness get higher than at the moment of death, since carrying unforgiveness on into death seems sure to leave our survivors with unhealed wounds. And depending on your beliefs about what comes with death, maybe leaves our own spirits in some mysterious way with unhealed wounds. That Jesus spoke words of forgiveness as he was dying perhaps came from his recognition that he and those he loved, and even those he did not know, might need that release of forgiveness while he could still summon up the words to speak it. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Who among us could ever speak such words, extending forgiveness to people at the very moment they hurt us, forgiving even though our enemies don't want forgiveness and will likely never ask for forgiveness? This archetypal moment of forgiveness seems to set an impossible standard for us. It's hard enough to forgive someone who asks our forgiveness, but does forgiveness even make sense if the offending person is not seeking it, or if they've died and will never be seeking it? I believe it does, provided the focus shifts from the wrongdoer to the one wronged, from the other person to myself. If I'm the one carrying the pain of harm done to me, then I'm the one who first needs healing. And forgiveness extended to another person, regardless of whether that person is alive or dead, regardless of whether that person even wants my forgiveness or not, that brings healing to me. My initial reason then for trying to forgive you is to help myself. Perhaps Jesus spoke those forgiving words shortly before he died, not to throw down a standard we can never meet, but as a kind of model for us getting peace ourselves. He was about to die, forgiving his enemies and followers for harming him, freed him to let go. How could I ever forgive you? How could I ever forget what you did to me? Notice that link, how forgiveness and forgetfulness are intertwined. One of the most pernicious teachings ever offered around forgiveness is that which seems to require me to sweep things under the rug of my heart, to wipe the slate clean, to go on as if nothing had happened. Forgiveness can make it possible to go on, but it does not accomplish that by erasing our memory banks. Psychiatrist Thomas Zaz observed, "The stupid neither forgive nor forget. The naive forgive and forget. The wise forgive, but never forget." If I assume that in forgiving you, I should also erase my memory of the harm you did to me, then I'm throwing away some valuable life lessons, making it impossible for me to learn from our experience, and setting myself up to have the same harm done to me again and again. Yet if I remember that harm while forgiving, that seems to pull me in two directions, which may be why we tend to opt for the easier choice to either not forgive and always remember, or to forgive and forget. But those choices do nothing to heal us, or to heal those we love, or to repair the relationships we cherish. For true forgiveness challenges me to remember exactly how you harmed me, to examine it closely for clues to understand how it happened, to understand myself and you more deeply. Not forgive and forget, but forgive and remember. I remember not so I can haul the experience out whenever you disappoint me and beat you over the head with it. I remember so that I can learn, and by learning, respond differently, and by responding differently, perhaps make the inevitable next conflict just a bit easier to resolve. The conclusion of Jesus' famous line, "They know not what they do," offers an insight into the sources of harm we're bound to inflict on one another over and over, not because we're inherently evil, flawed, but not evil, but because we carry a kind of spiritual ignorance that forgets, or maybe has never fully understood, how deeply we are connected to one another, how every move we make impacts so many others. Our greatest limitation as humans may be our impaired spiritual vision that keeps us from knowing what we do deeply enough, soon enough, to stop hurtful words and actions before pain is inflicted. So with this limitation we carry all life long, forgiveness will always be necessary if relationships are to go on, if life itself is to go on. I simply will not be able to keep from hurting you. You simply will not be able to keep from hurting me, because both of us are limited creatures. So we will need to carry a capacity to forgive and be forgiven all our days, or else, without forgiveness, our way through the world will be a path of estrangement that grows over time as we're more and more cut off from community until we finally die alone. All these elements of forgiveness, remembering while forgiving, forgiving because we forgot the depth of our connection, come especially into play in our anti-racist work. As white persons benefiting from a white culture, too often we did not know what we were doing to people of color because we had not learned to see outside that dominant frame of reference. As we learn more and more how to see with that double vision, more and more we cannot hide behind that not knowing. So we shift increasingly into remembering, painfully remembering, and then finding some way towards forgiveness. That will likely be a long time coming, as it will require us to ask in humility and then be willing to hear what people of color tell us forgiveness looks like. It may well involve reparations. It will involve giving up aspects of privilege that keep us comfortable so that we learn more and more how to be okay with not being comfortable. It will not be finished in our lifetime. But that does not keep us from steadily working towards remembering and forgiving, remembering and forgiving. Theologian Reinhold Niebuhr envisioned forgiveness as the final form of love. We have lines in the back of our gray hymnal that include that statement of his. That characterization has puzzled me for a long time. I tend to think of forgiveness as a kind of element or instrument of love, something that increases love or expresses love, but to equate forgiveness with love itself, much less the ultimate form of love, did not make sense to me until I had a few experiences of being present when a person was near death, or heard stories of others who kept vigil at the bedside of a dying loved one. So often, the person dying or the person keeping vigil would reference an experience of hurt in the relationship and cast about for words that could forgive, could reconcile. Standing at the ultimate horizon of our life, or the life of another, forgiveness becomes supremely important, the final form of love, showing up for us at that particular moment so that the last parting can be a parting of peace. The final form of love. I appreciate that Niebuhr placed forgiveness as a kind of last step, since I know that it will take me as much time as I have on earth to reach that last step. Too often I hold myself and others to an impossible standard of perfection, so that the need for forgiveness keeps accumulating. I once read that to forgive you means I'm willing to let you be who you actually are, rather than the person I think you should be. To no longer hold it against you, to no longer have you hold it against me, to no longer hold it against myself, an accounting which requires us all to be something different than the unique persons we are. To offer one another and myself that kind of acceptance may be the greatest gift we can give or receive. The word itself, forgiveness, already points us in that direction with its middle syllable. May we never cease trying to give that final form of love, an ultimate gift that allows each of us just to be who we are and call it enough.